Hello, I'm Jason Turvey, the middle-aged revolutionary, and joining me today is my friend and comrade Terry Eaton. Terry, how are you?
All right, Jason. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. The joys of spring are upon us. The sun
Well,
is
yeah,
out. There's a few wispy clouds in the sky, but most of the bad weather has now passed, and it's a time of growth and renewal.
absolutely.
Absolutely. And we are here on this is the special recording we're doing. We're doing this recording on Wednesday, the 16th of April. And it's in response to a question that was put to us by a commenter of our last video that we did on trade unions a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
The member of the YouTube member is called Chimpanzee, so it gives us no clues as to whether they're a man or a woman. But they did ask a question, and it was, what was our opinion on the issue of the Darlington nurses, and
Mm.
the trade unions' overall attitude towards women and women's cases. And we said at the time, and I said in reply to the comment, that we needed to do a bit more digging on the Darlington nurses story before we made any comment. Well, we've done that digging, and we're going to talk briefly today about the Darlington nurses case, and we're going to take it in the round a little bit, because obviously this is the 16th of April, and those of you who read the news will have seen that there was a Supreme Court ruling today, um, in a case that was taken up by a group called For Women Scotland, which is a women's rights slash gender critical campaign group set up quite a long time ago up in Scotland, and their case at the Supreme Court against the Scottish government. And the Scottish government had held the view that the Gender Recognition Act 2004, which allows people who have socialized in the opposite sex for 2 years and have a signed gender recognition certificate signed by a doctor to say they've got gender dysphoria, can be legally transferred from one sex to the other. What the Scottish government was saying was that those people who fulfilled the terms of the Gender Recognition Act were on equal terms to biological women in the context of women's safe spaces and so on.
Mm.
And obviously, it being um, For Women Scotland that were raising this issue, their argument centred around women, not men. So the Supreme Court has made their ruling today, and they have said that the concept of sex is binary. I'm quoting from the actual report that they wrote, 88 pages, but they cautioned that the landmark ruling should not be seen as a victory of one side over the other, and they said that transgender people still have legal protection from discrimination under the Equality Act, which they do. So let's get into this now, because the Darlington nurses case is quite a long-standing one. It goes back about 18 months, and it surrounds what began as a larger group of nurses, but is now currently eight. So there's eight nurses who work for the County Durham and Darlington NHS Foundation Trust, and they're actually in employment tribunal process now.
Mm.
The case has been adjourned. They convened on the 2nd of April, and they're now adjourned, and we'll explain why in a little bit. But it was the contention of the eight nurses that the NHS Foundation Trust decision to allow a man who identified as a woman by the name of Rose Henderson to use the changing facilities at Darlington Memorial Hospital was discriminatory towards them. They are claiming sexual harassment, they're claiming discrimination, victimisation, and breaches to a private life under Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights. So the Sandi Peggie story, which we'll touch on in a moment, that's up in Scotland as well, centres around NHS guidance on changing rooms for staff. The NHS guidance says that changing rooms are assigned to people according to their gender identity, not their biological sex,
Yeah.
which means under NHS guidelines, a person who identifies, a man, for instance, who identifies as a woman, therefore has free and unfettered access to changing rooms.
Mm.
Now, these particular nurses, they took umbrage with someone who was a biological male being allowed access to their change rooms. They also believed that this person was accessing their changing rooms for motives other than just to get changed. So the allegations that they made included that this man lingered in the changing room longer than was necessary, and also that he was looking at them in a way that they were made to feel uncomfortable. So they made a complaint. They actually wrote to the trust in March 2024 to raise their concerns, and the nurses have claimed that the staff, or there were more than 26 nurses that wanted to sign the letter, but because the NHS employs so many people from outside of Britain, including places like the Philippines, so these people are here on work visas, those staff were worried that if they signed that letter, that they would lose their visa, ergo lose their job, and then have to go home. So they declined to sign. So in response to the letter that these nurses wrote, the ward manager was called to a meeting with human resources and was informed that the nurses needed to be re-educated. You can take that as you find it. So where did the story go from there? Well, it exploded. It hit headlines. J.K. Rowling, who's arguably the most famous gender critical woman there is, took to social media proclaiming her support. But so did the health minister, Mr. Wesley Streeting. He took to social media and the mass media to support the nurses as well. That wasn't taken very well by the trade unions, but one trade union that took greatest exception to the nurses' plight was Unison, which was the I would argue probably the majority union representing staff working in the NHS. They declined to support the nurses in their struggle. And in fact, in response to Wesley Streeting meeting with the nurses and offering his support, the president of Unison, a chap called Steve North, brackets he, him, according to his Twitter bio, condemned Streeting for, quote, pandering to anti-trans bigotry, close quote. And so the nurses, finding themselves with no union support and unable to count on the support of other colleagues because they were here on visas, decided to pursue the matter themselves and started their own union, which was called the Darlington Nursing Union. And they've also had support financially in terms of legal assistance from a charity, let me see, a Christian Legal Centre. It's a charity that helps out organisations and individuals who I don't know what the best way to put it is, but it basically protects their rights to do certain things in accordance with their religious beliefs, I think is the best way to capture it. So the tribunal, as I said, opened on the 2nd of April. It was immediately adjourned, and it was adjourned because the NHS Foundation Trust claimed that they needed time to carry out an internal investigation into the incident. This is despite the incident taking place 18 months ago. But I think what we found today is the answer to why they call for that adjournment, because now, with the Supreme Court ruling, there is now clarity on the application of the Equality Act with regard to safe spaces. And I think it's highly likely that the Darlington Nurses case and the Sandi Peggie case up in Scotland will be closed off very soon. But Terry, having set the scene and having done your own research into this, what are your impressions on what's happening with the Darlington Nurses and Unison and the Employment Tribunal case that they brought?
Well, you've covered it brilliantly, Jace, beginning of it. I looked at this case and I saw what was I thought was, well, this can't be right. So I looked more into it, because there are people I don't know around here who are active in women's, protection of women's spaces and that. Anyway, so I've more looked into it and in Twitter and then on social media and stuff, and then in different newspapers. I'm thinking to myself, well, this is straightforward. they've got a changing room there. The hospital and Unison have allowed a man to go into their changing room, which they don't have cubicles apparently. They just have lockers and they change by the lockers, which is a bit like a gymnasium changing room. You'd be a locker, but it'd be all men or all. But the lingering part and things like that, that's a bit of this is taking the pee, if you don't mind, because they're trying it on, and the hospital and Unison have hid behind this Gender Recognition Act. They've also hid behind the fact that there was a tribunal going on today. But what struck me was that there was a separate room that they said I believe that these nurses could go and change in. If that was the case, why didn't they say to the trans person or the person who claimed to be a woman, to ease the situation, you go and change in there because these are the majority here and it's their locker room. And I don't get that. See, I think they were trying to make a point, and Unison was allowing it because their leadership is pro transgender. Now, if you want to be transgender, that's fine. That's not. I'm not anti-transgender. What I'm anti is people who claim to be women wandering around women's changing rooms with no change to their body, to the physical function. They don't believe that you can change your sex, whether you have all your bits cut off or not. But anyway, and then Unison wouldn't back them, and I don't blame the nurses. And I think it's shoddy that a union of that size shouldn't turn around and say, no, we're defending our members to the hospital. This is wrong. You cannot allow this to happen. But they didn't. They threw them under the bus and left them to their own devices. And I hope that they come out really on top. And after today's ruling, as you say, it looks likely that they may do.
Yeah, it looks almost certainly the approach on the part of the County Durham and Darlington NHS Foundation Trust was to stall the employment tribunal until clarity could be found with this Supreme Court ruling. Well, we've got that clarity now. They have said that the legal definition of a woman with regards to its use in the Equality Act is based on biological sex. So this now means that not only does the NHS have to go away and look very carefully at its guidelines on changing rooms and stuff, but so does County Durham and Darlington NHS Trust. And they also now have to decide whether it's worth coming back in October, spending thousands and thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money on legal fees to fight a case that they've practically lost already.
Yeah.
But the point you were making about the changing rooms is an interesting one, because just to expand a little bit on what you said, the nurses originally said to their manager that they had a problem with sharing a changing room with, I believe it's Rose Henderson.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it, Rose Henderson, who was the trans-identified person who was trying to use those changing rooms. So they fudged it. And what they did, they offered them an alternative room in which to change. But this room that they were given was not a bona fide changing room. It was just an old office that had become vacant. And so the nurses found themselves not only having no facilities in this particular room, so that when they were taking their clothes off and putting their new clothes on, they were having to pile their clothes on the floor because there were no benches, no lockers, no anything to put their stuff. But the other thing was that between the door that entered the office and the office itself, there was no intermediate door. So if the door was open from the corridor, you could see people changing in there.
Yeah.
So they had even less privacy, arguably, than they had in the changing room they'd already been given. And so they put all these things together, and they have made a claim, like I said earlier on, of sexual harassment, discrimination, and all kinds of other things. And it seems that between the NHS Trust and Unison, these nurses have been appallingly treated.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, to the point, and let's be clear, we've talked about this on other videos we've done in the dim and distant past, it takes a lot of effort to start your own trade union from scratch.
Mm.
And as workers, you have to be pushed to the brink, the very brink, to take the decision to leave the union that you were in and start one from dust. Because believe me, it's incredibly difficult to do. But here we are. The nurses have been appallingly treated by Unison. And I suppose the wider question I was going to put to you, Terry, given that it would appear from Unison's actions with the Darlington nurses and with Sandi Peggie's case up in Fife, the actions of the Royal College of Nursing, it's now obvious, especially if you're a woman, representation in your workplace is conditional now. So if you're ending up in a dispute with your company over something your union doesn't agree with, don't hold your breath for representation.
Yeah.
Especially if you're a woman. Because
Yes.
you will find yourself dropped like a hot potato, just as Unison have done it and just as the RCN have done it. So
Yeah.
what advice could you give women in workplaces now, given what these two unions have done?
Well, if they're in nurses, if they're nursing, I'd be seriously considering for making the union not just the Darlington Nurses Union, but the nursing union, and transferring to that, because they are getting no benefit. And Unison will. There's no benefits in being in a member of Unison if you're a woman. What's the point in being in there? If there's no benefit for you, if you can't rely on them when you're in time of strife to stand by the side of you and say, yes, you are right, and I'm going to defend you. I'm not saying all shop stewards of Unison of that ilk, but I can imagine that if they tried to defend a case like this, they'd be told, no,
Yes.
this is not the way we go. And that to me would smack of somebody from the top bearing down on a representative who may agree with those nurses who wanted maybe to take the case forward. But the union itself, the leadership have said no.
Mm,
And they've
yeah.
took, in my view, the easy way out and say, basically, Sodom, they're only women.
Yeah.
And that to me stinks. It doesn't
Yeah,
seem to
absolutely.
be fair the other way around. They don't seem to, you know, it. What did Mao Zedong say? Women hold up half the sky. Well, there's half as many. There's the same amount of them as there is of us, and if we're protected in our jobs, then so should they be. But they have different protections that they need as well above ours, and one of them is not to be leered at by people who want to dress up as a woman. And I won't change my view on that, and I can be castigated by anyone for it. But I'm sorry, that's the way I think.
Mm,
Those women really have been badly treated, and I would seriously consider not not being a member of Unison, and encouraging all the friends not to be as well,
mm.
and join this other union. You're not going to do anything for
Yeah.
them. There's got to be
Well,
a
that,
way
I mean,
forward.
if you take Unison in the NHS as an example,
Hmm.
I mean, I don't have the figures, but instinct
No, but
tells me that the majority of nurses in the NHS are women.
I would say so.
I don't think that's an unfair assumption. Now,
No,
that would mean that Unison, alongside the RCN and others, would be representing the sex that is the majority of people in a certain job, that being nursing. And then for those people to be told by their union that they won't be represented because they have expressed opinions that the uh, the union hierarchy find distasteful,
mm,
that will leave a bitter taste in the mouth of people who've been
yeah,
paying in fees. And let's be clear again, something that we've said time and time and time again in all the recordings we've done and all the stuff we've done on trade unions. In modern trade unionism, most trade union members are not active. Their activity begins and ends at paying their subscriptions.
yeah,
But it's done like that on the understanding that when they get into trouble, they'll get help.
yes,
And these nurses haven't had that.
agreed.
Haven't had that.
Um,
So what I'll do is I'm going to read from a motion that was passed at Unison's women's conference. Now, they held a women's conference in Edinburgh. It ran from the 13th to the 15th of February. And it coincided, funny enough, I'm sure it wasn't planned, but it coincided with Sandi Peggie's tribunal, which was taking place in Scotland at the same time. So I'll just read. This is a short extract from the
Yeah.
motion one. So they made it the first order of business. So I'll just read out the following clauses. So this conference believes: one, that trans women are women and trans men are men. All our LGBT plus comrades must be respected. Two, that trans equality is a trade union issue. Trade unions are about uniting us together to make us stronger, and we oppose all divisions amongst our class. Well, that's bollocks. We'll come back to that in a moment. Women's rights are not diminished by trans people having more rights. Rights are not in finite supply. In fact, when we unite and organise together, we can often win more rights for all. Four, therefore, that women have a vested interest in standing alongside our trans comrades in solidarity and in resistance, and all of us fighting back together. Now, that's only an extract from the motion, but the motion went on to call for the production of a quote myth-busting fact sheet unquote to counter the idea that an increase in trans rights would lead to a decrease in the rights of others, and to campaign for the Labour government to introduce self-ID for trans people, quote, as they had originally pledged to do in 2019. So I want to pick up on point two. Point two, I'll
Thought
say
you
it
might.
again, that trans equality is a trade union issue. Trade unions are about uniting us to make us stronger, and we oppose all divisions amongst our class. Now, the reason why I said that was bollocks is because no trade union I know does not divide working class people along the lines of identity. Every single trade union, even the most militant ones like the RMT, divide their workers and their members along lines of identity, be it sexual orientation, religion, race, you name it, they will divide people. So for Unison of all unions to have the cheek to say trade unions are about uniting us to make us stronger and we oppose all divisions amongst our class, frankly, fuck off. That's bollocks. And you know that's bollocks because you have spent the last 20 years dividing working class people along lines of identity and not on lines of class. So the fact you've got the balls to come out now and say it like that, frankly, sticks in my craw.
Yeah, I'm
What
mine.
was your thought?
Yeah, Sam, mine. I'd seen that comment and I spoke to you about it before, but yeah, they've forgotten what class means. It's got nothing to do. I mean, they can argue, well, the trans worker is gender person is of the same working class. Yeah, but we're not arguing that point. Well, we're not saying that the trans worker can't work or should be a pariah. What we're saying is they can't go in spaces. It's simple to me. Why can't they just make it simple and say, these women are upset by it, and quite rightly, and we have to abide by their views. It seems to me that they're taking the view, maybe the leadership are trans, I don't know, but with a he, him, or he, she, or whatever it is they want to call themselves, it seems to me that they're on that spectrum. Now, if surely you've got a problem with that, you have to make a decision. Women's rights are paramount. Before, unions have fought for women's rights for years and years and years. And now to dash them against, the rocks, to me, which is what they would be doing by accepting what that paragraph that Union said, and dividing them, and us and them with regard to not just men and women, but now it's an us and them with men, trans men and women, and women. Why do they have to keep putting dividing lines between us? They could have happily worked together on a ward, um, as as what they were. Why do they have to go to the changing rooms? What's the big deal about a changing room? No one's arguing they can't eat in the canteen. There's no different from any other human, but you can't go changing in women's changing rooms when you're a biological man. It's just not. Maybe there's younger people in the unions who have more progressive views than me, and maybe I'm a dinosaur, and maybe you are. I don't know, but That's been my view. You represent everybody, but not to the detriment of somebody else. That's the point I would make, that I looked over the years, that to explain to people, you can't have this because of that. But because you're trying to play the, pull the wool over someone's eyes in whatever you
Mm.
want, and that's what it seems to me.
Yeah,
Defend the women, for Christ's sake.
yeah,
Unison, you should be
absolutely.
ashamed of yourselves.
Oh, they've been appalling. Well, it got worse for Unison because on the 4th of March, International Women's Day, of course, um,
Absolutely.
Christina McAnea, who is the General Secretary of Unison, took to Twitter and she said, and I quote, "Standing in solidarity with women everywhere. As the largest women's organisation in the country, we're celebrating 50 years of the Equal Pay Act and the Sex Discrimination Act this International Women's Day. Signed, Unison General Secretary Christine McAnea." Now, she got absolutely rinsed on Twitter for that post. At the time I did the screen grab, she was being ratioed out of sight as well. So she had 49 likes on that post and 606 replies. And the consensus amongst the replies was not supportive of what Christina McAnea had said. A lot of people were replying that Unison basically was a misogynist union, that it hated women, it wasn't interested in representing women's interests,
Well, it would seem to be true.
and certainly the Darlington Nurses case would bear
Yes.
that out. I mean, Unison is uh, well, I wouldn't say in a real bind. I just think it's disgraced itself in this particular case, um, in a manner that I would like to think they can't recover from, but I've got a feeling that they may do. But let's have a think about, just for a moment, some of the reasons. Why would a union of 1.2-ish million members decide that 8 nurses from Darlington were not worth representing? Why did they turn their backs on them? Because I'll proffer this. I believe it's because of, again, something we've said before many times in our recordings. It's the class composition and the political outlook of the organisers and paid officials of unions, not just Unison, but across the piece, where they do not believe in building class politics. They do not believe in building class consciousness. They don't, to pick up on the point you just made, they don't say, I don't care whether you're black, you're white, you're woman, you're man, you're gay, you're straight, you're trans, you're not trans, you're Muslim, you're Christian, you're Jewish. I don't care. You're working class. You're part of us. You're part of a wider movement.
Yeah.
We're bonded by our class. We're bonded by the fact that we are all wage slaves. We're all being oppressed by a cruel ruling class that basically wants to milk every ounce of work out of us and pay us as little as possible.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, what we have in modern trade unions is, I don't care if you're working class. I care that you're black, you're white, you're man, you're woman, you're trans, you're not trans, you're gay, you're straight, you're Muslim, you're Jewish, you're Christian. And it's that is the problem, is that
Yeah.
we have a middle class, or predominantly middle class, university educated cohort that are running trade unions of all different shapes and sizes, and they are prioritizing, identity politics over
Mm.
anything and everything else.
Yeah. Because sorry, go on.
Yeah, go on. No, that's it.
Because they don't understand class, in my opinion. They've never come across class. They just think that people are people. They'll just make their own mind up. It really galls me, because it is about class, and it's something that you should remember, that it's us against them. And us is all the people who work against them, the ruling class who don't, and gradually more and more union leaders and leaders of governments. This will come crashing down. I'm sure of this in the course of time. because there's too much of it happening, and sooner or later something's going to break, and
Mm.
people are going to turn around and say, "We've had enough. We're not paying our money into the union to pay into the Labour Party, or to encourage us to vote Reform or Tory or whatever they want to encourage us to do." And I can understand if people have a friend who's trans, but they have to also understand that there are rights. Women have rights, and that's what seems to be smothered over in all this smokescreen about trans activism and trans this, trans that. It seems to be to make the big deal about the one issue. You're sort of maximizing the minimum. You know what I mean? And
Mm.
and minimizing the maximum. If you get what I mean, it's a quote from Martin Luther King. But um, don't you're making something massive out of something that's tiny when you should be looking at the big picture and saying that yes, we are all of the same class, and we fight the battles that way, not finding hobby horses, are in my opinion, to
Mm.
jump on and say, "Oh, let's go and represent all these people here who've got representation, and they may all be, I don't know, Chinese, for argument's sake. Doesn't matter. Let's go and start wading into Chinese restaurants and getting." And the class, it's just get the fucking point in the class, and the votes will come accordingly for a party that's going to represent the working class, which is not the ones we've got now. And seemingly, neither are the union leaders, because they're in the pockets of the Labour Party,
Yeah,
because they
absolutely.
all want. And that McNair, by the way, she is it McNair,
McAnea, I think her name.
McNair,
Christina
whatever.
McAnea.
She'll
Yeah.
be another one in the queue for
Oh
the
yeah,
velvet robe.
you'll be Baroness
That's
McAnea before
all
you can
they look
spit.
for in this
Yeah,
career that
absolutely.
they've come from university, straight into a union, bureaucratic job in the union, never represented a person in their fucking lives, but they're up there
Mm.
at the top of the tree
Yeah,
when the money's getting
exactly.
doled out and the ermine cloaks and they can sit
Yeah,
on there and the £300. They're an absolute shower of charlatans.
yeah, they are. And that I mean, just to linger for a moment more on the point about identity politics. One of the key reasons I believe that trade unions are so in on identity politics. The first one is what I've already said. Middle class people,
Mm-hmm.
if not necessarily from capital P privileged backgrounds, certainly from comfortable backgrounds, certainly not ones who necessarily faced poverty or saw poverty firsthand, who then went to school, went to university, got degrees, whatever's, and then ended up going straight from school to university to the trade union movement.
Yeah,
Whereas people like yourselves and myself, who I joined my employer when I was 16, become a rep when I was 23, and then worked my way through the RMT and then joined the TSSA, worked my way up to the top of, well, not to the very top, but on up to the executive level in the TSSA, you know, all from learning stuff organically, you know, the Gramsci term I like, the organic intellectuals of the working class, people who just never went to university, but just got their schooling from working and
hard
from
knocks, school of
representing
hard
members and
knocks.
all that sort of thing. You know, um, but it's not only the fact that these people are ostensibly middle class and ergo shun class politics because it actually only exposes their position in the class system.
Yeah,
The other thing
it
is
does.
one of the fundamental points of identity politics is to achieve nothing. It's there
Correct.
to achieve nothing. And it spends a lot of time and a lot of effort and setting up a lot of conferences and talking about a load of bollocks, but it's actually designed to achieve nothing, which is exactly why the trade unions are all in on it, because it's a fantastic way to spend their time looking busy, making certain groups amongst their membership feel that they are protected and that they're recognised and that they're being worked for. But in reality, nothing's being done, nothing's being changed, nothing's being built because it can't be built when you're dividing people along those lines.
Yeah.
And that's why the trade unions are all in it. They're particularly, I think, since the Labour Party were elected to power, notwithstanding the bin strikers up in Birmingham and solidarity to those boys and girls up in Birmingham. But apart from that, what we have in Britain 2025 is a load of trade unions wasting time doing absolutely nothing. And then
Correct.
when someone does come calling, like Sandi, Peggie up in Fife, or the Darlington Nurses, they get told to fuck off by
Yeah.
the union.
Other people have right from the beginning of it who've gone on the protection of women's. Mayor Forstatter and
Yep.
other people of her, like J.K. Rowling, if you wanted.
Yep.
People have the views on her or any of them, but what they said was right. And what these nurses are saying is right. There's no difference. It seems to be a common thread that it's attack women.
Mm.
I mean, you can have a joke with, I, you have a joke with people. It's but like in the past, it's not the same as now, but it's all gone to shit from what I can see. And I haven't been involved in the union, apart from me Unite community bit, but um, since I left work 8 years ago, so I don't. But we never had this in the post office, uh, and it's gone. I don't know. I don't get it. It's gone mad. It's gone
Yeah.
absolutely mad.
No, I remember. I mean, just to expand the point a little bit on the, if you like, the principle of people being represented by their unions without fear or favour.
Correct.
I remember when I was in the RMT, and I'll take you back to, I think it was about 1990. Oh, I'm going to say 1995-ish. So 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, the RMT were having a big internal debate, and it was about the representation, or no, actually, it wasn't the representation. Let me get this right. It was about whether or not to continue the membership of a person who lived, I believe it was in Portsmouth, who was active in the British National Party. So obviously, the union as a collective, I don't mean like the hierarchy or the head office contingent, I'm talking about the whole union, said, well, all right, we don't believe that the British National Party is a vehicle for the working class. We don't believe that the British National Party is a vehicle for progressivism or the betterment of the country. But this bloke is entitled to be in that party, as
Yeah.
repugnant as it might be.
Yeah.
And then there was other people saying yes, but they are a repugnant party. They are a party that would, if they got a whiff of power, would outlaw the very likes of us. We would be banned as trade unionists. We might be thrown in prison as trade unionists and so on. We want that sort of person out of our union. And the whole argument boiled down to a simple question. Do we expel this man for being a member of the British National Party? And this debate went on for months. And there
Yeah.
was very, very strong arguments on both sides. And one of the key arguments on the side that the man should remain in the union was that he was entitled to representation just like everyone else. And you look at how things have declined in that 30 years. As it was, the RMT did actually throw that man out. But when you look at the decline in representation of members, and Unison is a union, I'll be honest, I've never heard good things about Unison from anyone that's had any contact with them. Be it people in trouble or even people, Comrade Ian, my friend from Colchester, he joined Unison. He still doesn't know where his
Oh, Ian.
branch
Yeah.
meet, doesn't know where his branch meets, never had a membership card, nothing. They take his money quick enough,
Oh,
but
yeah.
they've given him nothing else. But putting that to one side, you know, do you believe that Unison had the same debates about whether or not to represent the Darlington Nurses as the RMT did 30 years ago about whether to throw one member out for being in the British
No, I
National
don't.
Party?
I don't believe they even thought about it.
No.
They'd made the the leadership or the hierarchy of the union have set their stall with the motions. And and you've said before, motions at conference are just like tick boxes. There's very rarely debates. They're usually already been nodded through
Mm,
before the read out and what have you. So that was just went without saying that they were all going to go through. But I'd be embarrassed to be a union representative sitting on the shop floor who didn't put my hand up against if there was a vote. So they've already made their mind up that
yeah.
whichever nurses or group of nurses came forward, they were going to be in the wrong.
Yeah.
And had these nurses wilted and not stood, that would have then set the benchmark for you to say, right, this is what's good. This is now what will happen in every establishment that NHS established that we represent. Until someone else came along and said, no. And they'd say, well, there's precedent for it. Well, you can say that when it suits you, but
Mm.
there's precedent for not having men in women's changing rooms.
Yeah.
But they didn't use that.
Yeah, that's right.
That's, they always go back to say using precedent when it suits. The top and bottom of it is the women needed representation from Unison. They didn't get it. They were treated shabbily. And if people would say, well, then if to represent them, they weren't representing the trans person. Well, no, they just have to say the trans person. You have every right to dress up as a woman, but you're not to go in their changing rooms. End of. And it would have just ended. The guy would have gone and got changed in the cubicle that they gave the nurses to, or gave to the nurses, I should say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it just seemed to me a mountain out of a molehill, and something that they decided, fuck these, we're going to just take this on, and they're only nurses, and they're not telling us what we're doing. And
Mm.
good luck to them.
Yeah. And it does speak to the, if you like, the internal dynamics inside Unison, that they weighed up whether or not to represent 8 people. That was originally 26, but 8 people who had what they believe was a legitimate grievance about the way they were treated by their trust, their NHS trust. They weighed up representing them against the potential internal backlash they would have got from their activist layer, arguably their paid organiser layer, and others if they had represented them. And they opted to dump the nurses to placate the activist layer that's inside Unison and the paid organiser layer as well.
Yeah,
And it's that is pretty shameful. And what's next? I mean, let's be honest, not wishing to go too off topic. We're talking about trade union movement that, with almost no exceptions, is all in on supporting the NATO-backed proxy war in Ukraine.
correct.
If someone gets into trouble on a an argument or a disagreement or something to do with the Ukraine, maybe getting into trouble on a protest march or something like that about the Ukraine war, and they have a position that is not within locks or not in lockstep with the trade union that they're a member of, are they going to say, get stuff, we're not representing you? You actually don't want the proxy war in Ukraine to take place. You said you don't want to arm Ukraine. We do. And most of the trade, Unison's one of them. So are they going to get dropped? And then where do you go from there?
Well, it just carries on
Does it carry on? Do they refuse to represent
because,
people who are conservative? For instance, if they're members of the
well, yeah, but
Conservative Party, they
that's
won't
the other
vote for.
argument with your BNP argument. This is I've argued
There you
this in
go.
the past over the National Front, and I say you don't have to like him being in the National Front, or them or her being in the National Front, but because they're not going to win anything. But the point is, if that's their view, fine. But as you said, they still deserve representation.
Yep.
And if that person doesn't agree, who, which God-given right was given to the union leaders to decide that a mere mortal of a member can be anti-Ukraine war, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they've made their mind up. This is what they set the store. And by the way, when you talk about these activists, these are all the ones from the paid officials up that are all in on these little, you know, the identity politics issue. Anything that gets them an easy life, gets them up the ladder, gets them
Yeah.
well in with the Labour Party.
Well, that's it. And again, we've spoken and written about this many times. There is almost nothing to distinguish people at the top of the Labour Party. And I don't mean necessarily the parliamentary Labour Party. I'm talking about the people you don't know in the Labour Party, the paid organisers, the paid officials in the background, the ones whose names you don't know. There's almost no difference between those and the same people in the trade union movement.
Correct, there isn't.
And there's a complete osmosis. There are people moving
Yeah,
backwards and forwards between the two all the time. Now, how does a trade union official get a job, a paid job in the Labour Party? Well, they're certainly not going to do it by building class consciousness. They're certainly not going to do it by building class politics. They're certainly not going to do it by eschewing identity politics. They're going to get it by doing none of those things. None of those
tells
things.
me,
And
yeah,
dumping nurses
yeah.
when they're claiming discrimination and harassment.
If it tells me that anyone who doesn't agree, any union leader or official who doesn't agree with the party line, the Labour Party line, or the line that's been decided amongst them, they will never get anywhere. They will either get the position they're in now. That's what they'll be in forever. They won't get up. They'll never get picked to go and be leadership, or go in the Labour Party, or stand in a safe seat, or get an ermine robe in 20 years' time, like all of them are going to be parading in shortly. The traitors from the post office and all that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And other unions, they're not on their own.
No,
And she
no,
won't be the first, and she won't be the last until the
absolutely
whole
not.
corrupt system is altered.
Yes, that's right. I mean, we're coming up to the end of our time. The trade union movement is essentially still a force for good. I have a lot of
Yes,
criticisms of Sharon Graham. I have a lot of criticism of Unite, but they are standing with their workers in Birmingham as the rubbish piles up and the rats start running all over the place. They've been on all-out strike since March the
they're
11th.
just the two-legged ones.
Yes, exactly. They've been on strike for over a month, all-out strike,
Yeah,
and they are currently being backed by their trade union. But my God, there's so much that needs fixing in the trade union movement, isn't there? And the fact
oh,
that sorry, go on, sorry.
no, you're right, definitely. I'm just only going to, reiterate your point, really, that the bin men, I mean, don't, for God's sake, don't let Beckett come near them. But Jesus Christ. But yeah, they're backing them until such a time comes where Keir Starmer turns around and says, look, enough's enough. You've had your game for a month now. Now get these back to work, or this will happen.
Mm,
Then I'll be waiting for that bit next.
yeah,
And that's the point where the bin men have to realise these are not going to back us. We've either stick it out ourselves, but they would need support from the country, really. And how do you do that unless other union leaders aren't calling strike
yeah.
in support of them?
Well, that's it. And again, put the question earlier on. Put the question again. No, no trade union has questioned the decision of Unison to ditch the Darlington Nurses.
No,
No union has questioned the Royal College of Nurses' decision to ditch Sandi Peggie in Fife. So if Unite ditch the bin workers, no other union is going to come to their aid. No other
no.
union is going to criticise Unite. Well, I think we'll end it there. Um, just to sum up, I still think that trade unions are an essential force for good. They are still the biggest organisers of working class people this country has. They are riven with problems, and but those I believe those are problems that can be challenged. I think those are problems that can be overcome. But for now, the Darlington nurses have every right to feel badly let down by Unison. Sandi Peggie has got every right to feel let down by the Royal College of Nurses. And until we get trade unions that will back their members, regardless of their personal beliefs, their political beliefs, or anything else, then this will just be cited as another step in the decline of trade unionism in this country.
Yeah, I'll go along with that.
Terry, thanks for joining me today,
You're
and
welcome.
I'll see you again very, very soon.
You will. Thank you
Thank
very much,
you.
Jason. See you.
Cheers.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Cheers, mate.